Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. This is the ACSOM Bulletin and I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm going to be asking a few questions today around the month of January. We're going to be looking at the transfer window and also at the fixtures, both at Celtic and at Rangers. Interested to read some comments this morning from former Rangers captain Barry Ferguson, who believes Celtic will go on a winning run. Does that mean that we can claw anything back in January? I've been reading the comments with interest over the last couple of days, and we've been called a negative state of mind, because we're talking about the issues that Celtic are facing at the moment. Well, I disagree with that. I don't think it's negativity. I just think that, you have a platform to shine a light on some deficiencies at the club, and we have a whole team of pundits who come on. Only one of them's on today, at the moment anyway, but we do have 11 regular pundits who come on to air their views and give you their perspective on all things Celtic, and then we invite you guys and girls into the equation, and obviously your voice will be heard even more than normal today, because I will be working through all your comments. Any questions that you have for me at Celtic State of Mind, ask them in the comments section and we'll work through them. We're also moderating the comments on Facebook and on YouTube, because obviously you do have some unfortunate comments coming through about the pundits themselves, about Celtic, about our comments. Everybody is entitled to their opinion, but as long as we keep it nice and balanced and fair, that's all we're looking for. So yeah, I don't see it as being negative. I think, at this current situation that Celtic find themselves in January, we're 19 points behind the league leaders. Yes, we have 3 games in hand. Livingston, Aberdeen and St Mirren. Do you expect us to get the 9 points from the 3 games in hand? I hope so. Even then, we've got 10. We're looking for a couple of favours. It's not just a win and a draw. I think we're looking for 2 defeats against Rangers, as well as Celtic winning the last 2 derby games against them. So it's a big, big ask. But let's have a look at that with as much positivity as we possibly can. I'm going to start off with Patrick Murphy. Let's not forget, we were very happy with our summer business and the board's backing. Any transfer has the potential to not work out. This season we've had a few. We need to be careful this month. Yeah, I think we do. Let's have a wee chat about the transfers and how successful or otherwise the last window has been as well. I think that's important to have a look at that. So we brought in a number of new signings, and again, yeah, even on this particular broadcast, I spoke about how happy I was. At the time, I felt that many of the positions that we were crying out for were filled. Unfortunately, it would appear that a huge amount of the signings that have come in, or at least half of them, haven't worked out. So I think when we're trying to review that, it's easy to say, well, I thought it was good at the time. But let's review it at this stage and let's see how many of the new faces have indeed been successes. How many of the new signings do you think have been a success? Let me know. It'd be interesting to see if we will continue with all the loan deals that we have beyond January. It may well be that we have no option other than to keep the loanees coming in. So we've brought in like Salt, El Yunusi, Barkas, Turnbull, Ayeti and Duffy. And on this very podcast, I said, it looked as though, in fact, I asked the question, is this Celtic's most impressive or best transfer window in recent history? Because it looked as though we had invested. We had spent big on the likes of Barkas, on Ayeti. We'd brought in the promise of Turnbull, one of the most promising, if not the most promising young players in Scottish football. Laxalt came in from AC Milan. I mean, he had proved himself at international level with Uruguay. El Yunusi, I wanted him to stay. He stayed. It was great bit of business, I felt, at the time. He's been inconsistent. And of course, Shane Duffy. Let's have a look at the 6 signings we've already brought in. And let's reassess how successful or otherwise that particular transfer window was, because it looks now, obviously looking back, a completely different picture, doesn't it? I think that we've been left short in various areas of the park, even before the injuries to the likes of Julien, the couple of injuries he's had, and Forrest. We've been very, very short in some of the full-back areas, the wide areas, and of course at centre-half. So where will we strengthen? So I'm looking at some of the comments we made yesterday around Gordon Strachan's claims of how transfers work at Celtic. Now, when he was talking about it, he didn't clarify that he was referring to his time at the club or the current situation at Celtic. And obviously he has an insight into how things work at Celtic as it stands because his son is part of the coaching staff. And what he said is that the staff, the coaching staff, the manager and the coaching staff decides the players that they want to work with. Now, when I look at that, I think he is right. He is right. They do decide, but they certainly don't identify. And I think that's where some of the problems arise with the whole setup. So let's go a wee bit further back. When Ronnie Dyler was in charge at Celtic, do you think he identified Colin Kazim Richards and Carlton Cole? Do you think that was Ronnie Dyler that identified those players? Because I don't think it was. So the setup at Celtic is that we have obviously a whole recruitment team. We've all seen the leaked documents that caused a bit of a stooshy about a year and a half ago, where by Celtic's minutes of a recruitment meeting were leaked. And what you can see from the leaked document is that a number of people are involved in these meetings. Everyone from the head of recruitment at that time, I think, was Lee Congerton. It's now Nicky Hammond. Neil Lennon is in there. Some of the scouting staff are in there because I remember seeing the names such as Tosh McKinlay. Peter Lowell is involved in that as well. So the way that it works at Celtic is that a number of players are identified. So the manager, through consultation with the head of recruitment, can identify areas of the team that need to be strengthened. And then the head of recruitment, along with his scouting network, etc., identify a number of players within a price range. And those players are often taken to Peter Lowell, and if they are higher than the price range that Peter Lowell wishes to pay, then he's asked to go and find another group of players. So if you can imagine the situation we were in looking for a striker before the season started, and Ivan Toney, and I know that his name comes up because he has been a success, and Albion Ayeti, is it even a mixed bag? I don't want to call anybody a flop, but he's certainly not been as effective as I would have expected a Swiss international £5 million player coming from the EPL to have been. So there's a number of factors going into this. So Nicky Hammond presents a list of players to Peter Lowell. Often he's asked to go and present another list. And then the shortlisted players are presented to Neil Lennon and the management team. So what Gordon Strachan says isn't wrong. They work with players they want to work with. But they're given a group of players. They're given a group of names. And these are the players that they are able to sign. They're within the club's budget. So it's not as though you've got free rein to go out and pick the players that you want. So that was the Ronnie Dyler example I gave with Colin Kazim Richards. Fast forward to Brendan Rodgers. And we know that obviously the John McGinn deal is mentioned time and time again. So he was identified by Brendan Rodgers as being a player that he wanted to bring in to Celtic, and I think part of that process was succession planning for Scott Brown, not comparing the two players, but I think that John McGinn could have been a Celtic midfielder for years and years to come. He has gone on to be a huge success down at a very high level in England. But there was another issue, not just the John McGinn signing. There was another issue. There were probably many others that I'm unaware of, but Celtic under Brendan Rodgers wanted Cristiano Piccini, who was a highly rated player at that time and who probably was within Celtic's budget at that time. So there's been two issues that I'm aware of in terms of signing players. So the first one, John McGinn, there's so much been said about McGinn and the fiasco that ensued when we tried to sign him. He was obviously one of the players that Brendan Rodgers wanted. It wasn't solely due to the fact that we failed to get that deal across the line that made Rodgers wish to leave Celtic. It was one of the reasons, obviously. So, on the day that John McGinn signed for Aston Villa, and he's down in Birmingham, he contacted as many people as he possibly could with access to Peter Lawwell and also the company lawyer at that time to say that he wanted to sign for Celtic and he wanted them to give him a call back. And he still hasn't had that call back. So there was an opportunity for Celtic still to sign John McGinn at the last kind of minutes when he was down in Birmingham and he was preparing himself to sign for Aston Villa. So you can understand how, under the circumstances, for whatever reason, Peter Lawwell didn't want to complete that deal, how frustrating that would be for the manager and how frustrating it was for Brendan Rodgers at that time. And it certainly contributed to his eventual departure from the club. The other one, and the reason I bring this up is because Colin Watt on yesterday's show, spoke about a situation whereby we were in discussions with a player and we flew him over to Glasgow, and Brendan Rodgers was very keen. It was a player he himself had identified during one of these meetings to come to Celtic, and it interfered with Brendan Rodgers' personal family holiday. And this is the example that Colin brought up yesterday. The player in question was Cristiano Piccini, and the deal that he believed he was coming to talk about and he was very close to signing was changed. So he's flown over to Glasgow. Brendan Rodgers was very, very keen to sign him, so he puts his personal family holiday on hold, and Peter Lawwell changes the deal. He changes the deal to such a degree that Piccini jumps on a plane and goes back to where he came from. So these are two examples of a manager identifying players and the deal not being done. So these are the things that we need to be aware of in the January transfer window. The way that Celtic operate, it's been touched upon by Gordon Strachan, but there's some examples whereby we really have failed in the transfer market. And I've seen a lot of people saying, no one was complaining when we were winning 9 in a row. And it was under the same kind of setup in terms of the structure of the club. And I take that on board. And one example that I can remember is I was at the Motherwell Cup final with Kevin Graham when we clinched the second treble in a row. And on that day, Kevin and I couldn't get a ticket, actually, and we ended up having to get hospitality. We had to be in a lounge to just see the game. So we were in the lounge, and in that same lounge were a group of Celtic players who weren't stripped for the game. So they're standing in their cup final suits. And one of the players was Marvin Compere, the infamous Marvin Compere, who had come into the club for over £1 million on big, big wages. And, he played 60 minutes against Morton. It was one of the most bizarre transfers in recent memory. Now, at the time, no manager wants to admit that they don't have the final say in transfers. So this is a transfer that I believe has been claimed by Brendan Rodgers to have been his transfer. But when a player comes into a club and he is the answer at centre-half, he comes in around about the same time, in the same window anyway, as Jack Hendry. And of the two centre-halves, we don't get a kind of long-term replacement. So we don't have a centre-half. We're looking to try and replace players of the stature and the standard and ability of the recently departed players like Van Dijk, players like Boyata. So we're trying to kind of fill that gap, and we're bringing in centre-halves like Jack Hendry and Marvin Compere at that time. Now, as I say, Brendan Rodgers isn't going to admit I'm not in control of the transfers here. So I don't remember him ever saying he wasn't his man, he wasn't his player. But going back to the story, Kevin will verify this, we're standing in the lounge, having our cup of tea, because none of us drink, certainly not that often on my part. And there's Marvin Compere in his cup final suit. And he was a bit of not even a cult icon, to be honest with you. He was a bit of a joke figure that day, because groups of Celtic fans who were in the lounge were going up and getting selfies with them, getting their photo taken, but it was all a joke and a laugh. They were picking Compare over the other players who were in the group at that time. And I can't remember who else was there, but there was, I think, 3 players who weren't in the squad, and they were all suited up. So Marvin Compare was a complete waste of money. He played 60 minutes, he cost us £1 million, and he was on big wages. Now, he went away, he left Celtic, and he played fairly regularly for the club he went back to in Germany, and then he recently retired. So going back to the point and the criticism that has come in over the last couple of days, no one was complaining. You're right. No one was complaining. In fact, we thought it was funny, to a degree, to such a point that some fans were going up to get their selfie taken with Marvin Compare because he had turned into this figure of fun, if you like. I'm not going to call him a joke figure. He's a guy who represented Germany international football at full international. So I'm not going to criticise the player. It's not his fault Celtic signed him. But going back to that, 2 points. Firstly, when you're winning, and you're winning trebles, and you're winning consecutive trebles, times 4, and you're winning 9 in a row, then I wouldn't expect the fans to be going through so many of the nuances of what's going wrong. And I think that success definitely masks a million deficiencies. And because this season we've not had that same level of success, and we've not had the same standard of performance, and the Celtic fans are absolutely quite clearly unhappy. I'm not going to speak for every Celtic fan out there. There's a huge number of them unhappy with the way this season's going. I'm amazed if anybody would be happy with the way it's gone. But yes, when it's not going well, we can analyse and we can focus on a lot of the things that the club are not doing well. Now, it's not in the short term. I think the problems have always been there. But as I said before, success masks these deficiencies. So previously we didn't have the same kind of challenge that we've had this season. And I take absolutely no pleasure in saying that. We've had a really strong challenge this season, to the point where Rangers, and again, someone who might be able to access this information, Rangers aren't a million miles off where Celtic's Invincibles were at this stage of the season. They're not a million miles off of that. They've not dropped a lot of points. So Celtic had to be at their very best this season, and for a whole multitude of reasons, we've not been. So in answer to a lot of the criticism that's coming my way, because I don't think this is a negative state of mind, we are reacting on a daily basis, and we're taking everybody's points on board to the situation that is currently unravelling at Celtic. And a lot of these issues were already there, but we're quite happy to bury them sometimes because we're winning games, we're winning trophies. And it's only when sometimes the things are going wrong that we can shine a light on all of these deficiencies. So the January transfer window is open. So I'm asking the question, first and foremost, let's have a look at the last transfer window. How successful or otherwise has that been? 6 players came in, like Salt, El Yunusi, Barkas, Turnbull, Ayeti, Duffy. How many of them have been successful signings? How many of them have contributed as much as you would have liked? And how many of them, if given the chance, you would actually offload in January? Let me know, because as I say, I'm going to be working through your comments far more closely than normal, due to the fact that we have no other pundits on the show today. But, sometimes it's actually quite refreshing to be able to focus on the points that are coming in. And also, where do we need to strengthen? Where do you think we'll strengthen? Many of the comments coming through are very similar in terms of where you think we need to strengthen the side. But I do think we're in a very unusual situation at the moment, because due to the standard of performances and the poor results this season, the club came out and made a statement saying that the situation would be reviewed in January. Now, although we haven't had a statement that specifically says that the review has been concluded and here are the results of said review, we have had an update from the tabloid press, apparently from Dermot Desmond, saying that he's happy that Neil Lennon will be in charge for the rest of this season. So if that's the case, then we look at the transfer window and we ask ourselves, well, what do we normally do in January? And I remember a few weeks ago, Stevie Mullen was on the show. Stevie can't make it because he's based in Glasgow. Stevie is a great member of our team. He's a fantastic member of a Celtic State of Mind. He's the St. Roch's president, and he was very influential in our charity drive just a few weeks ago. And again, every time I get the opportunity to bring that up, I will. Because it was so heartening from my perspective, to see Celtic fans pulling together. Now, we might disagree all year. You might tweet me after these broadcasts or during the broadcasts and tell me that I'm talking nonsense. That's okay. That's fine. I expect that. I want debate. I want you to disagree with me. I wouldn't expect for a moment that everybody's going to have the same view as me. And that's why I think it's important that we have a whole group of pundits who come on a daily basis and they air their views, which may be the same as mine, but more often than not, they'll disagree. So if I'm going to give credit to Celtic supporters by saying that we all pulled together that weekend, which we did, I'm going to take every opportunity to do that. So we raised over 26 grand that weekend. It was a quadruple, treble charity weekend, or what a weekend it was. But Stevie was a big part of that. And St Roch's Rock Talk, which is a mental health awareness support group, and it takes place on a Sunday at James McGrory Park. But they are there for everybody who requires their help, anyone who's suffering from mental health. So they were one of the beneficiaries, one of the 4 charities who benefited from the 26,000 plus that we raised that weekend. We, not ACSOM, we as a support, everybody who got involved, all the sponsors who got involved, all the guys who sent me supportive messages, which I've played, and they were tremendous, from ex-Celts and Celtic supporting figures, high-profile figures, and all the other podcasts and shows that became part of what was a very memorable weekender. You were all part of something very special, and the total amount, the only amount that was taken off that is a small fee that GoFundMe take when you transfer the money into the bank account. That was the only fee. So there was no other overheads. Everything else was covered by a State of Mind. And the money that's coming out is over 6.5 grand for each of those charities has been distributed to the charities. So you should all be very proud of yourself. But Stevie Millen was a big part of that, very influential part of that whole weekend. He can't be with us in person at this moment in time due to the restrictions, of course, but also we've had some bad weather and it would prevent Stevie from coming through to Dalkeith. And now it would be good to dial him in, but he's the first to admit that tech isn't his forte. But Stevie will hopefully be back with us next week, and if not the week after, because he's a massively important part of the ACSOM team. Now, that said, it will allow me the opportunity to tap into more comments than I normally would, because when you're so focused on the guests, you're dipping in and out of the comments field. But what I would say is that there's been a suggestion online from one of our regular contributors, Mark. I thought it was a very good suggestion. It's one that's been swimming around anyway. The bulletin is daily. That's going to stay at 12:30. We're always going to have that. And it happens at 12:30 every single day, unless there's a weekend day where we're not playing. But that said, even though we don't have a game this weekend, we're going to run a bulletin on the Saturday. When there's a game, of course, we do the match day coverage as well, and you normally get 4 or 5 bulletins that day. So Mark came up with a suggestion because he and many others are tired with some of the long-standing shows, the talk shows, the phone-in shows that you get on the radio. Now, I've got to confess, and I don't know, it's never been really part of my routine to tune into these shows. I'm not slagging them off, I'm not criticising them, because I genuinely don't listen to them. But they're well established, they've been going for 20 odd, sometimes longer years. But a lot of Celtic fans are dismayed by what they hear on these shows, and they see that the shows have their own narrative, and often the narrative that they have is an anti-Celtic narrative. And what I can definitely say is, yes, I criticise elements of Celtic. I criticise players, I criticise management, I criticise the board. I'm a Celtic fan, first and foremost, and I have absolutely no agenda against Celtic Football Club. But what I think is important is that we raise awareness and we raise issues that we're not happy with, because if we don't, then all you have left is you have no alternative voice. All you have left is you have the official vehicle of the club, and you have a mainstream media that may have an agenda. Now, I say may have because I think back to an event that I did quite some time ago now with Tom Boyd and Simon Donnelly. And in promotion of that event, we did a press call. So we just sent out a press release to members of all the press out there, most of the press out there, and they get the opportunity to come along and get an interview with Simon Donnelly and Tom Boyd. And in return, what happens is they promote the event that you are trying to promote at that time. So you normally do these things in the week of maybe a big European game. Unfortunately, we won't have many of those for a wee while. In fact, we won't have any of those until the new season. So anyway, that's the way it works. You might think that I'm hooring myself out to the national press, but if you're trying to raise funds for charity, etc., as that particular event did, sometimes that's the way that it works and you use it as a vehicle. So anyway, on that particular day, I remember one of the guys that turned up, one of the journalists that turned up, was Anthony Haggerty, and I'd never met Anthony before. But what became very, very clear very quickly is that he was a good guy. He was a good spud, and he was a Celtic fan. So anyway, we had a good chat that day, and I remember him leaving the venue and saying to me, you know, Paul, we're not all bad guys. And that stuck with me because they're not. And there's a lot of people out there that I've met, people like Hugh MacDonald, who is fantastic, brilliant writer, superb writer first and foremost, but he's part of this mainstream media that people despise. A lot of people despise it. I can understand why, due to maybe an agenda, due to some of the narrative, and due to some of the big stories in Scottish football that were not covered sufficiently or have been forgotten about. And that's happened as well. We all know what we're talking about. But there are figures within that area and within that field who I've got a lot of respect for. And I'm not going to name them all, but Hugh MacDonald is one of them. Anthony Haggerty is another. And I'm pretty sure you'll realise that when Anthony comes on to the show, which he has done a couple of times now, he's been on 3 times. He said he's hat-trick and we need to present him with a ball, an ACSOM ball. What he provides is absolutely brilliant. It's a great standard of input and content when Tony is involved. So it's not as black and white as a lot of people think it is. And, I don't think it's hooring yourself out when, for example, you're asked to comment on Celtic's current situation, as I was last month, and it wasn't egotistical. Anybody that actually knows me would realise it's not. The first person to criticise me is me, and I don't take all that side of things so seriously in terms of me, but I take ACSOM seriously and I take my football club seriously. So if you're able to air your views and be a voice of, and I'm not saying I'm the voice of the fan, but a voice who has been able to look at the way that Celtic fans are feeling through the ACSOM broadcasts and air those views. And does that make any difference? Because that's another thing that came out yesterday on Twitter. What you're doing makes no difference. Well, I disagree with that. I think that, and I hark back to the street movements of yesteryear. I wasn't comparing where Celtic are just now to the 90s, but you look at those street movements, you look how influential the fanzine movement was for Celtic and the street movements that came thereafter. So we had a clutch of Celtic fanzines. Some came and went, but some of the long-standing ones from back then, I always subscribed to Not The View, and I read Once a Tim, Always a Tim. And from Once a Tim, Always a Tim, you got a voice of Matt McGlone, who at that time worked under a pseudonym. So if you are looking at early copies, I think, was it Rory Collins was Matt's pseudonym at that time. But Matt was the editor of Once a Tim. And what grew from Once a Tim, Not The View, and various other fanzines, the fanzine movement, was that the Celtic fans had a voice. So we had Save Our Celts initially, which was a fan movement, and it was set up by none other than our very own Jim Orr and others. And we've interviewed Jim a few times about that, and also Willie Wilson. There was a few others involved. That hit a brick wall after a while, but from the kind of dying embers of that was this belief that we could be organised, we could come together as a fan base, and we could make a difference. And Matt McGlone, Brendan Sweeney and others were obviously massive, instrumental in Celts for Change. So I don't subscribe to the fact that fans and a fan movement, a fan group, is pointless, meaningless, and it won't make any difference. I think it's vital. And in regards to the kind of comments or the criticism around getting into bed with mainstream media outlets like Sky Sports and speaking to them, again, what happens is it's not about putting yourself out there or trying to increase your own exposure. It's about the information that's been provided to us and to a Celtic State of Mind by fans who tune in on a daily basis. So just to try and clear that up as well, because you do get a lot of criticism for it. Philip Halloran, welcome to the show. You're commenting on YouTube. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well. And I hope everybody's well during these difficult times as well. Because, you know, I've spoken about Rock Talk and a lot of people are struggling at this moment in time. And I brought that up the other day when we were speaking about renewing season tickets. Natasha Miko, one of our newer pundits who had joined the ACSOM team over the last few weeks, said that, you know, she supports Celtic and she will renew. And there's so many fans like Natasha. And I think, you know, I will always support Celtic first and foremost. But there's a lot of fans who are saying that the only way in making a change at this moment in time is by not renewing and by withholding cash and by not buying official merchandise, etc. So it's interesting to hear those views, because I think some people say, well, you're holding the club to ransom. We're in a situation at the moment where a lot of people want change. So let's have a look at Darren Foy's comment on that. With there being a chance of a change at CEO level, would a manager want to come in with that uncertainty, and would a new CEO want to appoint their own manager? I think that's an excellent point, Darren, because it's been a poor season so far. We are going to try and look at a positive twist on that, because I'm going to look at January and I'm going to ask the question, by looking at the fixtures, will we claw anything back in the month of January? Because it does appear that the fixtures between now and the end of the month favour Celtic, and now that's on paper, and I take that on the chin. It's on paper. You never know which Celtic are going to turn up. But by the same token, let's have a look at the corresponding fixtures. But I think what you're saying there, Darren, is very interesting, because we expected a change, didn't we? And a lot of people were frustrated by the way the club responded to, for example, the protests outside Celtic Park after the Ross County game. So when you look at the reaction of the fans, and then the lack of reaction and the lack of engagement by the club to those fans, you sometimes think to yourself, there must be something else going on here. There must be something else in the background, because the guys that run this club, the two big figureheads, because remember, people are answerable, obviously, to a board. But, you know, when you think about Celtic and you think about the decision makers, all you seem to think about is two names. And the two names are Peter Lawwell and Dermot Desmond. These are the two big figures. And I think there's been a big criticism, and I think it's right to criticise some of the other people, particularly the chairman, some of the other people who are on that board, who are almost faceless entities who don't push for change, who allow, I think, certain people within the club to have it their own way. They could definitely make a bigger change. So the reason Darren Foy's message, the reason his comment I find so interesting, is it could well be that there is a bigger changes afoot at Celtic, and they're looking at the situation and saying, well, if a new CEO comes in and we've just appointed a new manager, will that even prevent the CEO from coming in? Will part of the stipulation be that they want to be part of that recruitment process? If they're going to be working, and now I know that Peter Lawwell was into his 18th year as a CEO at Celtic, and that's unusual. But if they're coming into a process, let's say, where the CEO is expecting to be in position for 3 to 5 years, then surely they want to work with a manager that they have had a part to play in terms of the recruitment. I think it's a great point, Darren, and it's a point very well made. Now, something else that's happening in the background at the moment is that Colin Watt's just popped up as part of this broadcast, so I'm going to call him in. There he is. There's the man. Colin Watt, welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Paul. You seem to be doing very well running the show yourself. You're doing very well, sir.
Oh, well, thank you very much. But, you know, it's sort of very platitudinous, and, you know, we've been criticised on this show for not giving enough plaudits to Celtic. I'm going to be looking at some of the more positive elements of this month, absolutely. But what I was just saying there is a great point came through from Darren, Colin, in relation to bigger changes at the club perhaps? We are calling for maybe a change at a higher level, which would result perhaps in a structural change in terms of bringing in a new CEO. If that is in the mix, do you think that could be one of the reasons, or a big reason for Celtic's inaction in terms of the manager situation?
It really wouldn't surprise you with it. I mean, there's been discussion of potentially Peter Lawwell stepping down this season, the sort of the 10 in a row era, as I was talking about yesterday, coming to an end. So when you kind of bring in new change, you're looking at new change right across the board. So maybe it's a kind of case of Peter Lawwell's going, well, we'll all go out together. We'll not go out separate. We'll go out as a team. And that's the problem. It's the sort of pals act, and that's what's carried Celtic through the last couple of years. Is when you look at the people that's came in, especially guys like Gavin Strachan. Gavin Strachan came in because he's Gordon Strachan's son. It wasn't because he was the best coach out there. It was because there was the pals act there, where Gordon Strachan's pals with the guys that are behind the scenes at Celtic. He's put his thoughts forward, saying, "Look, my son's available. Can he come in?" And even John Kennedy seems to be pals with the guys behind the scenes. So you put it all together, it's all pals act. So for me, that's one of the main reasons that Neil Lennon's still in a position at Celtic Football Club, is that they're looking out for their pals, they're bringing their pals in, and they're not actually looking at the structure and what's best for the club.
You know, when you look at the current situation, Colin, and there's been a lot of people who are a bit bemused by the lack of action. I've criticised the club for a lack of engagement. This podcast has been called a negative state of mind. I've got a positive state of mind. I've actually got a positive state of mind. But I think it is important that you've got to keep questioning, you've got to keep challenging. And I seen a brilliant quote about the club having extraordinary standards. And the fan base has extraordinary demands. I'm happy with that. You know, you're happy to have these high demands, because if you don't, then you're quite happy to allow the rot to set in. So as soon as the signs were there, Celtic fans start complaining on podcasts like this, rightly so. It's not as though we're watching a winning side and we're looking for faults. It's not as though we're criticising for the sake of it. We're doing it because something has been wrong all season. A number of things have contributed to that. But we do want to talk about transfers today, Colin, and I also want to talk about January as a month, looking ahead, looking forwards. Let's try and look forward to January. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm definitely not going to take my eye off the comments section, because until you came in, it was just us and them. I was just talking to the people coming in, Colin. So I'm not going to forget about them, that's for sure. Someone has come in relation to what they expect the transfer window to look like, and that's Derek Ritchie. So welcome to the show, Derek. For everybody who is watching the video on YouTube, it's important to us that you subscribe, that you give us a thumbs up, all that kind of stuff, Colin, because that enhances our YouTube channel. We're not doing it because we want you to pay for anything. We just want you to subscribe so we can grow the channel. So Derek says, no doubt sign third-rate players in positions we don't need, that won't get a game and come out the window weaker than we went in. This was the big thing in relation to the last transfer window, Colin, and people laugh at me now, and I've seen people retweeting the broadcast where I asked the question, is this the best transfer window? Fair enough, I take it on the chin. It's a sizable enough chin to take it on. So Derek Ritchie's point there, I think when we looked at the last transfer window, the question was, do we come out of it stronger than we went into it? Now, Forster aside, I think we all kind of thought we did. We did come out of it because we kept all the players that had been kind of rumoured to be on the move or gathering interest in Cham, Rogic, Christie, Ayer and Edouard. We kept them all. We kept every single one of those players, and we added another 6 to the squad. Yes, we weren't able to keep Forster, but we brought in what we thought was a replacement in Barkas, who was an international goalkeeper with a massive price tag. So at that time, I think a lot of people thought, yeah, we've come out of that window stronger than we went into it. What was your thoughts at the time, Colin, thinking back?
I mean, definitely when you look at it on paper, I would say that the team looked stronger as a whole coming out of that transfer window. You're signing guys like Diego Laxalt, who was in the team of the year at the last World Cup. You're signing guys like Albin Ayeti, who West Ham had paid £8 million for. I actually took Neil Lennon to go and meet him to convince him to come to the club. We'd managed to keep a hold of guys, as you're saying, like Godson Edward, like Ryan Christie, Olivier Ncham as well, yeah. So when you looked at it on paper, it looked a great transfer window. But obviously football's not paper, and the performances that the guys have shown so far this season haven't kind of lived up to the expectations that those signings were given to us. Now, I mean, I've seen a point today that AC Milan are looking to basically get rid of Diego Laxalt permanently. I think the team was Al Hilal over in the UAE who were looking to sign him. Had offered him £2 million a year, and he turned down the deal because he wants to look to get a permanent deal here at Celtic. Now, that's going to be a big outlay. Now, at the minute, you wouldn't trust the current management team to spend that kind of money because you don't know if they're going to be there in the summer. I mean, all signs kind of suggest that they won't be there in the summer, so you're not going to give them £10-15 million in January only for the new guy to come in, to take a look at the team and then suggest that the players that are there isn't the players that he wants at the club. I think in January we'll be looking at probably bringing in guys that are like either on a sort of pre-contract basis or loan deals between now and I can't see us going out and spending a lot of money. But when you look at it, what can we do with this season? When you look at Tony Mowbray's last transfer window, we brought in guys like Diamanti Kamara, Robbie Keane. That was in mind to try and save the season that we've got there. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the kind of approach they take again this year, because behind the scenes they do believe they can still turn this round, and there's still Celtic fans that believe they can turn it around. But if that's the case, they have to kind of show that. For the most, I think Celtic fans have kind of written off this season. They're looking to the future. They'd rather see we bring in and strengthen ahead of the European qualifiers in the summer. So it's kind of split base, and the signings will go on depending on which camp that you fall into.
You know the thing, Colin, right? And there's been some heated debates, particularly on social media, about keep the faith. And they're being called a Keep the Faith Brigade, and we've had that chat on this podcast. Now, let's not forget why there are people who say keep the faith, and I don't take it lightly, and I don't like criticising it. The reason is because there have been, Celtic have always been, they were born of being the underdog. And, when you're looking at the past victories, pulling success from the joys of despair. And I've mentioned the 1986 season, Love Street, winning it on the last day in unlikely circumstances, 10 men winning the league in 79. There's so many other examples. These are a wee bit older than before your time, son, but there's so many examples. So people that are indoctrinated into the way Celtic, into a Celtic state of mind, if you like, it's because we believe anything is possible. Because we've got a kind of fairy tale history. So I get all that, I absolutely do. But I think when you break it all down to this season and you try to be a realist, my heart absolutely would say, Celtic can pull this back. We're Celtic, we've got the players, Neil Lennon's in charge. But my head tells me something completely different. And when I look at the performances and when I look at the stone cold facts in the matter, coupled with the fact that the team at the top of the league don't look as though they're going to buckle. I've said this for a few weeks. Dundee United 2-1, Motherwell 3-1. They got beat from St Mirren. Hibs, was it 2-1? 2-1 Hibs at home. Mm-hmm. And then we went toe-to-toe with them, and for large parts of that game Celtic dominated. So I did feel that these were the types of games that were showing signs that Rangers could be got at. But if they come through a run of performances like that, fairly unscathed, I know they're out the cup, then they'll be looking at that and saying, well, that's championship winning form. And I know they don't possess the same type of players that we have in terms of having been through all this and won trophies and won leagues. They've not been through it, but they have got the momentum now, and this is my biggest concern. So when I'm looking at the fixtures, which we'll do in a few moments, I'm still looking at them with my heart. I'm still looking at them thinking we can get maximum points this month, right, from the 4 games. And I'm looking at some of their fixtures thinking that's a tricky one. So I still have that about me because I'm a Celtic fan. And that is passed down to you with all the stories and all the songs, all these victories, these unlikely victories, Colin, of Celtic being the underdog. So that's fine, and I get it. And we don't have to fall out about it. But when you start looking at it with your head and you start thinking, well, look at where we are, look how far we have fallen this season, then all the other issues that are happening in the background. So we're going to talk about transfers just now. But before we do that, you've got to consider the point that was made earlier. If a new CEO is coming in at the end of the season, then the likelihood of us sacking the manager at this moment in time is slim to none. Even if we go out on Monday night and don't get a result against Hibs, if we are appointing a new CEO at the end of the season. So, great point, absolutely. So if that's the case, you've then got a manager who potentially won't be there beyond this season. Therefore, like what you said, we're not going to give him millions of pounds to go and spend. Now, the Mowbray transfer window you're referring to, we sold Scott McDonald, 3.5 million, wasn't it, to Middlesbrough, yep, which more or less financed the Robbie Keane deal. You know, in terms of the wages and everything else that was involved in a loan fee. Because we brought in a Robbie Keane who had been transferred from club to club for several seasons for tens of millions of pounds. And there was a massive, you know, the structure of that deal was huge in terms of the finance. And people say, oh, you know, Dermot Desmond throws a few million at this player and that. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not how football finances work. So we financed that deal by selling Scott McDonald, who, by the way, I reckon we sold prematurely. But you had the whole Robbie Keane thing. I mean, if it gives you a chance to have Robbie Keane in a Celtic jersey, you take it. But really, you know, although I loved watching Robbie Keane and he was a fine striker, one of the best strikers in my generation as a football fan, it was just short-lived. It was a short-lived process, Colin, because the likelihood of Celtic actually pulling it back under Mowbray at that time was very, very slim. Slimmer than even now, I would suggest. And I've been likening this transfer window probably to the 2018-19 one, where we've gone out and we've brought in Toljan for the right back. We've brought in Timo Weah. We've brought in Ollie Burke. Now, I don't think any of the three of them could be deemed as successful signings. No, but what happens there, and I'll use the example of Sorrow and Turnbull coming into the side. What often happens is you get performances out of the players that they're up against. So by the end of that season, Lustig had won his place back in the side. Lustig headers the ball onto Edouard to score the winning goal against Hearts in the Scottish Cup final. So often what happens is you're strengthening the squad by bringing in players who can fit a particular position. And I felt for a wee while that, believe it or not, Colin, because you've got to admit these things, I thought that Rodgers was getting a tune out of Burke for a wee while. I thought there was a performance at Tynecastle and all the rest of it. He's not a player I rate highly, and I certainly wouldn't want him back. Timo Weah, undoubted ability, but I think what happened is he made the wrong decision in the eyes of Neil Lennon as to his priorities, and therefore he didn't feature much. But he still speaks very, very well about Celtic, so great, and I wish him all the best. But I think we're going to be looking at a transfer window similar to that. Now, we've brought in 3 loans already, Colin. Will you confirm the limit is 6?
Yes,
is that right?
6. Yep.
So we could bring in another 3. I actually expect, and it's due to the circumstances we've discussed about the manager, the CEO, I expect us not to bring in any permanent signings. I think we'll bring in 3 loan players, and it's due to the fact that the manager may not be there beyond this season, and neither may the CEO. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a possibility? Is that realistic?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the route that we ended up going down. I think you have got to utilise what is out there and what's available. Obviously, you look now that Brexit's now kicked in, so signing guys like Patrick Klimala would be even harder nowadays. So maybe that's not a bad thing, because we have spent a lot of money on guys like Klimala, like Bayo, where we've kind of went out to these sort of more obscure markets and tried to pick up a rough gem and turn them into something. We won't be able to do that now, because there is a sort of points-based system where these players have got to have played so many times for their under-21s team or for their national team before they can even be considered for signing in the UK. So that might change the transfer strategy that we'll have. Just when you're speaking about that transfer window, it also reminds me of the transfer window where we brought in Craig Bellamy as well. It seems to be the sort of go-to is when things aren't going so well, you sort of bring in the big name and hopefully get the fans behind them and take them on for the rest of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that we look to do. Who would be, though, in this era? Who would be the Craig Bellamy or the Robbie Keane to bring back in? I mean, who is the names that's out there that you could actually bring up?
It's a good point, and I think that one of the finest players we brought in, even for a short period, was Craig Bellamy. He's a big pal of the show, obviously, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Big shout out for John Dykes for putting on a great charity event for some great causes. Well done. Keep up the good work, and hope everyone enjoys it. Take care. Bye.
The bold Craig Bellamy there, who obviously wished us all the best. He's now the Anderlecht under-21 coach, is Craig Bellamy. But Colin, let me know, because my video has frozen at this end. Can you still see me moving about? You can?
I cannot, no, but I can hear you, so it's still going okay.
So there'll be no complaints about that then. So when you're looking at, this marquee signing, I don't think we're going to go for that. I really don't, because when you consider a couple of the players you've already mentioned, Robbie Keane, Craig Bellamy, are very offensive attacking players, I don't think that's where our troubles really lie, is it? The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to look at the 6 players that we brought in, Colin. And these players are Laxalt, El Yunusi, Barkas, Turnbull, Ayeti and Duffy. I'm going to ask you to give me your take on have they been successful? This has just thrown me a wee bit because everything's going a bit slow on my camera. Have they been successful or not? So we'll start off with Diego Laxalt, Colin. Now, there is an opportunity perhaps to make that move permanent. I don't know what the kind of fee is that they're going to be looking for. I would expect it to be £6 million plus. I'm not sure if you've seen any of the potential fees. Let's start with Diego Laxalt. Has he been an effective signing? Has he been a hit since we brought him in?
I think that you've seen more good than bad from him. Has he been the most consistent player? I wouldn't say so. Has he been the kind of player that we expected when we brought him in? I think he did at first. I mean, his performance against AC Milan was really impressive. He had several of these performances in Europe. Hasn't really done it so much in the league so far. I feel as though when he came in, he was sort of like, he was free to do what he knew best to do. He was the one that was instigating the attacks going forward. He was throwing himself into tackles. He was getting himself up and down the park. And I think that was just what he knew from when he was playing at AC Milan and when he was on loan last season. But when he came in and started to adapt it to the style of football that we're playing, I think that's when his performances started to regress a bit. And I just wonder if you could just say to him, look, just play the way you know how to play, and we can kind of work around that, because there is a quality player in there, but we're not seeing the best of him at the minute.
I think there is a quality player in Diego Laxalt. I'm not quite sure where he fits in, where his best position is, Colin, in relation to how we are setting up at the moment, because although the Diamond has been very successful, and that will bring in one of the other players on that list in David Turnbull, I think that's been very successful. I'm still a bit dubious about the fullbacks at the moment and how they are implemented in that side in terms of Frimpong and Laxalt. So that's another discussion entirely, because obviously we also need to look at the centre half positions as well. So Laxalt gets a thumbs up from you.
Yep.
Overall.
Yep.
Now, El Yunusi is a player that we know well. We know him well because he's in his second loan deal at Celtic. I think that it was very unfortunate that he was played in last season's League Cup final where he was clearly unfit, and it really did damage the rest of his season. He was walking about in a moon boot just before that game. Apparently should never have played. But I mean, we've seen some signs. He's scored a few important goals in Europe. He's scored the hat-trick against Motherwell. There's been signs from El Yunusi this season. In terms of thumbs up, thumbs down, where do you stand on El Yunusi this year?
He is very hot and cold. I mean, when he's good, he's fantastic. Getting the hat-trick away to Motherwell was superb. Some of his performances in Europe have been really good as well. But we just don't seem to get a consistent run out of him. And I don't know if that's because we're playing him out on the left, where I don't think it is his best position. or whether he's just not getting a run at it. You see him coming off the bench. He scored a fantastic header. He seems to do really well in the air for a guy that's not that tall. So I don't know if you can get sort of 5-6 games in a row of consistency out of him. It would definitely be a success this season. But it's just another one. For me, he's very similar to Ryan Christie. I think when the two of them are playing well, they're a really great asset to have to the side. But when they're off the boil, they're almost like a man down on the park. You don't get a lot out of them.
No, you don't. And I've said before, I'm just checking his height here because I'm not sure he's that small, to be honest with you. I've said before about El Yunusi. It's a difficult one if you've got El Yunusi and Cham and Rogic all in the same team, because it's very unlikely that all three of them will perform. And that's because they, for me, are probably the three most inconsistent players we have, in Cham, Rogic and El Yunusi. You might get a tune out of one of them, Colin, but the other two will be passengers. And that's the risk. That really is a risk of playing someone like that and playing them regularly. So, yes, El Yunusi, so is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down overall this season?
It's a in between.
You're still undecided. Is that something that's maybe being swayed by performances you've seen prior to this season? Because, again, there was a spell last season where it looked very good.
Yeah, I mean, my favourite Elyounoussi performance is still the win away last season in Rome. He was outstanding that game. He was throwing himself about. If you look at the first goal when James Forrest scores, he's the one that actually digs in to win the ball back to then set him up. I think, and a lot of the comments are coming in saying as well, I think he's best suited as a number 10. I don't think he's got the pace to play wide left. I think he's better coming through the middle. And you've seen, when you look at the YouTube videos that are out there, when he links up with Albion Ayeti, it's when the two of them are playing through the middle. You never really see Elyounoussi playing wide left. And he's obviously done it as well for his country this year. So there is a great player in there. I just don't think the system we play helps him develop to the kind of player that he can be.
And then when going back to this diamond, which has been very effective, Colin, coupled with the two up front, the partnership of Eddie and Griff, which saved their season last season. And yep. we were hoping prior to the game at Ibrox that it was going to do the same this season. It's going to be very difficult then for Elyounoussi to become a first team regular, because where would he fit in there? Because you're not going to drop Turnbull for him, are you? Based on his form. And you're not going to play him as a second striker because of the partnership between Eddie and Griff.
No, it's a difficult one, and I think someone came in and saying, how many number 10s do we have? And that's probably the issue that we've got. We have strengthened in positions where we were already had the kind of depth in them, and the positions that we're missing out on at the minute are the positions that we're quite light in. For example, on right midfield, you're really missing James Forrest this season. He's a guy that creates sort of 20 assists and 15 goals a season over the last couple of years. He's been really impressive. Now you're kind of out there, you're stuck to sort of playing Ryan Christie or Callum McGregor on the right-hand side when they're not natural wingers. You've got Jeremy Frimpong, who wants to play a bit more further forward, but you're still relying on him to come back as well. So you can't really commit to being in a forward position. So we have a lot of strength and depth through the middle of the park, but wide left and wide right, we really haven't strengthened. And it's probably, if it was any normal transfer window, I would suggest that it's somewhere that Celtic would really look to strengthen. Yeah,
I mean, now it comes on to the biggie. Yeah, the big question of Barkas. He was a big signing for Celtic in the transfer window, Colin, and yes, he was the backup plan. There's no doubt about it. We had kind of, pushed for Fraser Forster to come back. Fraser Forster changed his mind at the last minute, and we'd already let Craig Gordon go. The wheels were in motion for Gordon to go. The backup plan was Barkas. He's come in with a big transfer fee on his head. He has come in for a lot of criticism. He's obviously not been written off by Celtic yet because he's regained the gloves. He's back in goals. How would you rate his performances so far? Has he been a flop or has he been a hit?
It's a difficult one with Barkas, I think, because he's not really had a save to make, but in the same sense, he's still not made a save this season. There's never been a point where there's never been a point where you've turned to him in the same way that you would have turned to Fraser Forster and say, this guy has won us 3 points today.
There was a moment at Ibrox where the ball hits off Callum McGregor's shoulder. I would have expected him to save that, mate. He had a safety mate then. Didn't he make it?
No, that is really harsh. If you're saying that that's the criticism of Barkas, is he never saved that.
No, that's one example. He's had plenty of saves to make that he's not made. The first game against Rangers, he's still standing there.
The first game, I agree. I think he was at fault for the goals.
I'm not saying he was at fault at Ibrox. I'm saying that he had a save to make. He didn't make it.
We'll agree to disagree. I don't think he could have saved that. I don't think.
He said plenty of saves. He said plenty of saves to make. He said plenty of saves to make. I just think because he's not clawed one out the top corner, people are saying he's not had a save to make. It's because he's not made them. He's had plenty of saves to make because he's conceded plenty of goals.
Oh, he's definitely conceded plenty of goals, and I think all 3 goalkeepers have conceded plenty of goals. I don't know if it helps the fact that you've not, or it doesn't help the fact that you've not got a settled back 4, back 5, back 3, whatever you want to play in front of him as well. So getting that sort of trust and communication within your team, you see that at times. At times, I mean, I seen someone try to blame Barkas for near Beaton sending off. I mean, Beaton's 25 yards away from the goal. He doesn't need to make the tackle that he's making. But I suppose, in a sense, someone's trying to say, well, the communication should be between the defenders and the goalkeeper. I disagree completely. But I can only see that's the way that they're coming around it. For me, it's a position we do need to strengthen. And I guess we are sort of... we have been blessed over the last couple of years with the goalkeepers that we've had. Looking at guys like Arthur Boric, Fraser Forster, and that's where these guys are being compared to. I think Barkas maybe needs another 6 months to settle in. I would give him to the end of the season. If you can bring someone in to strengthen that department between now and the end of the season, I think that would be a big plus sign for us. But I think you really won't be able to fully rate Barkas till next summer. I wouldn't be looking to get rid of him at this point.
So you're on the fence like you were with El Yunusi at the moment with Barkas. You're not going to write him off? No, I'm not going to write him off just yet, no. Now, you said there about strengthening in that department. The very fact that Neil Lennon started playing him again after Conor Hazard had played a massive part calling in Celtic winning the Scottish Cup, that would suggest to me that we're just going to run with what we have in terms of the goalies, Scott Bain, Conor Hazard and Vasilis Barkas. I mean, are you expecting us to go out and buy another? I think that might be the end of the road for one of the goalkeepers, but I don't think it would be Barkas. I know he's came in and he's played a couple of games, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see Conor Hazard go out on loan for the rest of the season, just for him to get the experience. But the move would need to be within the Premiership, the Scottish Premiership, not the English Premiership. And it would need to be to a team where he's going to get the chance to play at this level week in and week out. You look at a guy like Alan McGregor, so Rangers loaned out Alan McGregor to St Mirren and to Dunfermline before he made his way through into the Rangers side. He was able to gain that experience of playing in that league. When you look at Conor Hazard's last loan deal, it was out to Dundee in the Championship. You need him to play at a higher level. I think that's what they tried to do with Ross Doohan this season when they loaned him out to Ross County. He's not been given the chance because of all the other Rosses that's in front of him at Ross County. But yeah, if you're going to rely on Hazard to be either your number 2 or eventually your number 1, then you've got to give him the game time, and I don't think he'll get it at Celtic to the end of the season because either someone coming in or they'll keep it with Barkas through the end of the year. Yeah, sure. So we've got Laxalt's getting a green tick from you. You're on the fence with El Yunusi and Barkas. Next up is David Turnbull. Been a bit of a revelation. He has, and he's got that something about him that we've just not been able to see a lot of. Whether that's because he wasn't ready, he was just coming back from his long-term injury. I know he was off when he was diagnosed with COVID. David Turnbull in the last kind of 6-7 games that he's played has been a major benefit to this side. He's been really a big talking point of everything that Celtic do going forward, and I think he has the ability to be the best player in Scotland. Maybe not just now, but in maybe 6 to 12 months' time. I think he's outstanding. I remember Laura Bradburn compared him to Paul McStay a couple of weeks ago. And as I said, I never got the chance to see Paul McStay in the flesh. But
maybe the seeds are there that he could be as good as the maestro going forward. At the game at the weekend, I think he looked a bit tired towards the end, just before he was coming off. But I think that's maybe just down to the fact he's played a lot of games in a short period of time before having not played a lot. And I really hope that we do, between now and the end of the season, see more out of him. He would certainly be one of the first names on the team sheet for me. And massive green tick for him.
You want him and Sorrow, Colin, don't you? You want them to remain as part of that diamond, because that has really been, if last season was all about Eddie and Griffiths coming in, and in previous seasons we had the Hartley and Robson season coming in to save the day, you kind of felt that Turnbull and Sorrow were going to be that partnership that was going to come in and turn the season round.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen a lot from him. I really like Ismaila Sorrow, and it really surprises me that it's taken this long for someone like that to make their name in the first team. Surely he's shown this week in, week out in training, and he still couldn't get into that side. That kind of concerns me. What else is happening over at Lennoxtown? Is there players over there that are really showing what they can do and not getting a chance? I see Luca Connell travelled over to Dubai with the rest of the team as well. Now, he's not even been on the bench at any point. But between now and the end of the season, I'd be really surprised if we don't see him involved in some capacity, whether it be coming off the bench for 15, 20 minutes. Everybody, I mean, you said it yourself, Paul. If I'd said to you back in August, we're going to be playing Ismaila Sorrow as our number one midfielder in January, you'd have been saying something's went really wrong here. But no, it's not the case. It's the case that he's been the most consistent and the best midfielder that we've got in that position.
No, you're right, and I do remember his name being quoted, but I think there was an air, I'm not going to say desperation, I think it was the last throw of the dice, Colin. It was almost as if we'd tried everybody else, and a lot of these names were starting to be thrown into the pot, and we've seen it, Sorrow's name being commented on time and time again. But he was alongside the likes of Luca Connell, and I don't think he was any further ahead in terms of what I had seen in a Celtic jersey. But I'm not watching him every day at training, like you say. And Brian Harkin raises a point as well. Throw in the youngsters, identify the players we need now. I think if you were to do that right at this moment in time, though, Colin, there might also be the view that we're throwing in the towel as well as throwing in the youngsters, because we were pretty critical earlier on in the season, when Celtic were facing Rangers, and we've had to throw in young Welsh. He'd only played one game at that time. There's been occasions in Europe where we've had to play Henderson. He's come off the bench. There's been other occasions where Anthony Ralston, has been one of the only options and has made it onto the bench. So these guys haven't played enough for me. If they're going to come into the first team, they should already have had a period where we're giving them game time, even if the games are in the ones that you would expect to be far more comfortable. So that we do have a group of fixtures, generally at Celtic Park, Colin, where you would expect Celtic to win the game. And I don't mean that being big-headed or entitled. So you're playing Hamilton first day of the season. Give some of these guys half an hour in a game like that. Try and build up their confidence and their experience, so that when you come to the big game where you've had a few injuries or illnesses and you're having to throw in young Welsh. And by the way, I don't think he played particularly badly in the game.
No.
He played against AC Milan in the same weekend, and he's kind of disappeared from view. I don't think that's how you develop a young player.
No, and we had the chance. I mean, we do have the 5 substitutions this season, which will probably not be the case from next season onwards. This was the season where you did have the opportunity to include the youngsters on the bench, to throw them on for 10-15 minutes to see what they could do. But we also had the chance to loan them out. We could have loaned them out to teams within the rest of the league, because when you look at it, we are now relying on other teams to try and take points off Rangers to get any sort of title challenge back open. And there's guys in that squad that aren't going to get the game time at Celtic, that could be loaned out to other teams within the league who could strengthen them, that could make it that so when Rangers got to play against them, that it's a more difficult opposition that they've got to face. Like guys like Patrick Klimala, he's not going to get a run of 6 or 7 games this season in a row to see if he's going to be good enough. Laura's doubling down on this McStay thing, isn't she? But these guys, and guys like Henderson, and guys like Dembele, and others, even Anthony Ralston, these guys should be out on loan at teams in the Premiership.
No, I don't disagree with that, because otherwise, Colin, they're simply not playing competitive football. when was the last time that Anthony Ralston played a competitive match of football? Was it last season he was on loan to St Johnstone? You were looking at the loan players.
Yeah.
So
and he was a consistent performer for them last season. He was. I think that if the manager, who's totally slipped my mind, that left St Johnstone,
Tommy Wright.
Tommy Wright. If Tommy Wright was still in charge at St Johnstone, I think he would have tried to bring him in permanently in the summer.
Well, you think about, his last game would have been March, pre-lockdown, first time round. So he's not played a game of football in 10 months. Now, if you're in your early 20s and you're losing a whole year of your career, he's never kicked a competitive football in 10. That's not good enough. That's not how you develop footballers. And that's something that I think we've been very, very poor at over the years. So I'm going to give a big green tick to Turnbull by the sounds of it. We're moving into the realms now. You've had two players that you think have been successes in Diego Laxalt and David Turnbull. El Yunusi Barkas, you're on the fence. He certainly wouldn't make any snap decisions on them just yet. What about Albion Ayeti? Comes in with a big kind of pedigree, if you like. He's got a reputation. We've seen him for Bal. He's gone to the English Premier League. It's not worked out. We brought him in for $5 million. What's your thoughts on Ayeti?
It's quite funny, isn't it? Because after 6 games, West Ham fans are going, why didn't we give this guy a chance? He'd scored 5 goals. He'd made an assist. He was looking like the kind of penalty box striker that we were crying out for. That performance at home to Hibs was outstanding, and then he gets injured, and we've not really seen the best of him since. He's also not been given a full opportunity to prove himself since, and his performances where he's come off the bench, he's looked sluggish, he's looked sort of disinterested, but every time that he comes off the park, he genuinely looks disappointed with himself. I feel as though he's a very confidence-based player, and I think if he gets a couple of goals, he can go on a season. But so far, if you had to compare it overall, I would say that it's probably been a thumbs down to Ayeti signing this season.
It's a shame. Yeah, it's a shame because he looked so good, in dispatches, Colin. And then recently, when he's been coming on as a sub, he's been really ineffective. Maybe looks as though he's carrying a wee bit of weight. To be fair, looking at the pictures in Dubai, he's looking a wee bit trimmer. And I'm hoping that, coming back, I know it's not a pre-season, I know it's different, but coming together with your teammates, being away, coming back, it might make a difference for Ayeti. But in saying that, he would need to try and break up the partnership now of Edouard and Griffiths that for several months many fans have been crying out for. I think the reason that wasn't put out as the starting forwards was the fact that Griffiths wasn't fit. Well, he's obviously fit enough now. He started a few games. I don't think Ayeti's going to break that partnership up. No,
but that partnership's not going to last forever either. It genuinely wouldn't surprise me if we sold Odsonne Edouard this window. I see that Edward's actually now got a new agent, and he's been linked again with a move to Aston Villa. He's only got 18 months left on his deal. He's either going to negotiate a new contract at Celtic to stay for another 12 months and move on in the summer, or he'll probably move this window. So you have to look to guys like Albion Ayeti and to Patrick Klimala to step in, because you're not going to replace someone of the quality of Odsonne Edouard overnight. That's going to take a big job, and I don't trust the scouting team behind the scenes that they've got someone in ready to go, so that if Odsonne Edouard moved on, they could go and bring this guy in a couple of weeks. I don't trust that. So you've got to look to the players that you've got.
Well, you look at the situation prior. We had Dembele and Edouard both at the club, and as Celtic fans, we realised that the cycle was going to result in Dembele leaving the club, but you were quite confident because you had Edwards, developing in the background, Colin. And perhaps, and I'm not comparing them or saying they're at the same level, we've looked at Ayeti stepping in, but he's not really came up to any kind of level that would suggest, like you say, that he's going to step in, is he? So that will be an interesting thing if indeed Edouard leaves in this window. Duffy. There you go. There's a big name. Shane Duffy comes in a bit of a blaze of glory. Celtic fans have been crying out for Shane Duffy. We spoke to Spencer Vignes, the Brighton and Hove Albion author, who told us what you get with Duffy. I don't think we've had it.
No, we've not, have we? I don't know what's happening with Shane Duffy. I don't know if he's not got his head quite right since he's moved up here. I know he's went through and he's lost his father this year, and I don't think he's ever settled in Glasgow. I don't really know what it is. not been the player that we really expected him to be. Even in the games where he plays well, there's still a mistake or two in there. And I feel as though he's really trying far too hard to settle into this side. You saw it, I think it was the Kilmarnock game when Chris Ayer was given the man of the match. He turned round and says, this is actually for Shane Duffy. And it obviously shows that the guys are trying to G him up. They know the kind of player that's in there. But we've not seen enough of it. And put it this way, if you were forced to make a decision now on whether you would sign him permanently or give him back to Brighton, I think he would go back down south.
These are the things as well that might be out of the club's kind of control in doing the deal, Colin. You know, it may cost us a lot of money if there's a send back clause. So you've basically looked at the 6 signings, Colin. You've said thumbs up for Turnbull and Luxall. You're on the fence with El Yunusi and Barkas, Ayeti, and Duffy gets a big red cross next to their name at this moment in time. I do believe that Ayeti, you know, there's quality in there. We've seen signs of quality in there, but I don't think he's going to get game time. I really don't think he's going to get the game time, particularly when you're looking at the way that Griffiths and Edouard have teamed up in the past. It takes me on to the subject of transfer targets, and I'm going to have to say it because it has appeared as a story, as a rumour, as in the press. Benkovic. The name keeps coming back up. Benkovic, centre half. His loan deal to Cardiff has been cut short by Leicester City. Are they looking to send him out on loan elsewhere? If so, do Celtic sign a guy who's played very, very little football since he left the club?
Where do you start with Benkovic? Benkovic didn't see out the rest of his loan deal with Celtic because basically Neil Lennon knew that he was going to be moving on. He was fit, he could play, but he knew that he wasn't going to be there the next season, so he tried to make a partnership out of the players that would be there. Is he a great player? Yes, he is. Is he someone that I wouldn't be surprised if Celtic make a move for in this window? Yeah, he is, because if you look at Celtic's transfers this season, it's all been players that we have previously scouted before. Everybody that we signed this summer, we've looked at trying to sign transfer windows before. There's not been a chance that Celtic's actually went and scouted a guy for 6 months before we actually tried to sign him. This is all guys who tried to get before. This transfer would fit into that mantra. But I think Benkovic really needs a permanent transfer. I don't think a loan deal will help him out. I don't know what he is now. I think he's maybe 24. Keeping him fit and spending the money on him is the risk, and it's up to Celtic whether they're going to take it. If he comes in, I think it will be on a loan deal, but it will be a last-minute thing because I think he'll be really desperately looking for a permanent transfer or a spot in Leicester's squad.
He's 23. He's 23, Colin. What I would suggest as well, I think he played one game for Cardiff, and obviously he's had a loan deal at Bristol City before then. Alan Morrison, who has contributed to ACSOM over the last year or so, put out a very interesting graphic on Twitter to show where Benkovic sits in relation to the defensive stats. I don't know if you've seen that, Colin. He was quite high up. Pretty high up in the list, you know, and he's comparing some of the centre halves from the last few seasons, and I think Julien was pretty high up on the list as well. But Benkovic, his defensive stats were very promising. But the big problem for me is, are you going to get value because he's on big wages? You're going to get value in terms of the amount of games that you're going to get back from him. And he's just one name of many that will be popping up over the next couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure. Luxall, we might have an option to buy him. I asked you before, what kind of fee do you think you're looking at for Luxall? 6, 7?
Yeah, that's the kind of figures I'd seen over the last few days, was around 7 million.
And then Alfie Dottie's name has come back into the frame. There's 6 months of his deal remaining at Charlton. He's been linked to a few other clubs. Stoke are interested. Do you think we'll have a look at him, left mid?
He certainly fits the mantra of a signing Celtic would try to make. He's on a free contract. You'd be able to get him without having to spend too much of a development fee because he's making the trip across the border. And I see that Charlton manager actually came out and confirmed that he wouldn't be signing a new deal at Charlton, that he would be moving on. So yeah, he would definitely be someone that you look at. Also in that position, you've got guys like the Preston duo, Ben Davies and Ben Pearson. So I think there might be a couple of pre-contract signings made this summer, just to give whoever's going to be coming in a bit of option in his squad, because I think there'll also be a lot of players moving out. Some players I've also seen linked that I don't think are worth even making the effort for is guys like the boy Gallagher from Motherwell. He's just about to turn 30. I don't think you're going to get anything out of that. I can't see him being a benefit to the team when you're going to try and get into Europe next season. I don't think he's worth that at all. And I've also seen the moves for the boy Porteous. I don't think he could make that step up to Celtic.
No, well, these are the big questions, Colin, but we have a whole recruitment team and a number of scouts apparently scouting the world in terms of looking for players all year round. So I'm pretty sure there's a few files to be looked at, even though it wasn't that long ago Neil Lennon was telling us he wasn't going to be entering into the transfer market. He was happy with the balance of the side, but since then, obviously a week before the Rangers game, Big Julian collided with a post and put paid to all of that. One final thing before I let you go, Colin, let's have a look at the fixtures over January. Going back to that point we made at the top of the show, whereby, you know, a lot of the time as a Celtic fan, you let your heart rule your head. You think it's not over till it's over. Let's have a look at the January and let's actually ask you your opinion on the fixtures coming up. Starting off with Celtic playing Hibs at home in the next fixture. Do you see a win, draw or loss?
I would say win. I think Hibs are going through a bit of a tricky patch at the minute, and I know we've got a resident Hibs fan on here who will tell us if I'm talking nonsense, but they have only just managed to bring in a goalkeeper because they're going through a bit of a goalkeeper crisis. They brought in a boy from Arsenal on loan for the end of the season. I believe they're also close to signing Chris Cadden from Columbus. He was a very good player at Motherwell before he made the transfer over there. Hibs struggles at times when they come to Celtic Park, and I'd like to think that we have used this break to Dubai for everything that we've claimed to use this break to Dubai for, that they will come back fresher, fitter and ready to go. So 3 points on Monday, please.
Okay, corresponding fixture, Rangers against Aberdeen at Pittodrie. How do you see that one going?
Rangers win.
Oh. Following Celtic's game against Hibs, we play Livingston at home. See any trouble there? We beat them 3-2 last time round. I know they scored a late goal, but I can't see there being any issues, do you?
I wouldn't think so. Livingston are doing actually really well under David Martindale since he's taken over. I know he made the step up from assistant coach to head coach this season. So, yeah, they'll be a tricky side to face. I'm sure they'll also be a side that comes out and gives us a right good go. But I do fancy us to get the 3 points there.
And the corresponding fixture is an away tie for Rangers against Motherwell, who at the moment are managerless. It would appear that Tommy Wright's in the running. The aforementioned Tommy Wright is in the running for that job. Do you see any shock results there?
Again, no. I wouldn't want to commit to seeing Rangers drop any points. I know there's the potential there, but they've just not done it so far this season. I'd rather be surprised that they do drop something. I mean, you look at the run they had on last year. You didn't expect them to drop points to Hamilton and teams like that. I'd rather be surprised if they do that. And I think they'll probably pick up the points. Motherwell are having a really bad time at the minute. They're kind of languishing towards the bottom of the table. Maybe if Tommy Wright takes over, then they'll be able to get something and they'll be able to get themselves on a run because they have a good squad there, but they've not really shown that this season. And it kind of surprises me when fans turn around and say, oh, we should sign the centre-half from Motherwell, the team that's sitting towards the bottom of the table. Yeah.
And what about Celtic's game against Livy this time away from home? Any issues there on the plastic pitch?
It's traditionally been a place that we struggle, and it's not as if we're intimidated by the arena, because when you go to Livingston, you've got about 7,500-8,000 Celtic fans there, so it's almost like a home game on a smaller park. The plastic pitch seems to be an issue, but we've managed to win on other plastic parks, so I don't see why we can't do it there. It's a bit of a mental thing. It's something we need to go over, but I think we can do it. I think this is the time. I'd see another 3 points.
Yeah, so a similar result to the one against Hamilton, perhaps. What about Ross County for Rangers? That game is at Ibrox. Yes, John Hughes has had a response from the Ross County side. A big enough response to take anything from Rangers?
No, as I said, I think it's probably going to annoy everyone in the chat, but I'm going to say that Rangers will pick up the maximum points in January as well.
As well. So Celtic v Hamilton, you're expecting... Now, the thing with that, Colin, is we currently, as everybody knows, are 19 points behind, 3 games in hand. There's 5 games whereby we have an opportunity to claw back. We have the power and the influence to claw back points from Rangers. 5 games, 2 against them, of course, and the 3 games in hand. Even if you were to do that, and it's a big ask, even if you were to do that, you're down to 4 points. You're expecting Rangers to lose 2 games, not just a loss and a draw, because the goal difference is so large. So you're expecting them to lose another 2 games. So you're looking at January. I think that's one of the most difficult run of fixtures that they're going to have. If you were to break it down, month to month, if you break it down, and you reckon you've looked at that, you reckon they're going to get maximum points. That's how difficult the task is this season to turn it around.
I just don't see anybody in the league that has the ability to take the points off them. You look at the run that they're on. They beat us without even having a shot on target. I mean, that's a bit of luck, that, right? But they've only conceded 5 goals in 22 games this season. So their defence is doing really well. I know nobody really wants to hear it, but it would take something out of the ordinary for Rangers to go on and drop these points. I would be absolutely delighted if that was the case, but I can't see it. I'd rather be surprised than disappointed.
The thing is, Colin, we will be here to discuss it if and when that does happen. One final point from you before you go. Give us a wee update on the Celtic State of Mind Facebook page.
Yeah, so the page is growing really well. I think there's close to 3,500 people over there. So if you can find it on Facebook at Celtic State of Mind, we post all the bulletins and all the shows that we do over there. It's a place for the fans to go over and to kind of air their views. Just remember, but we don't take any kind of personal or abuse of anybody. It's been a difficult season without having to go through all that. Let us know your feedback. Get involved. Just don't be an idiot. That's the bottom line, is what we'd say there.
Well, the big thing is it's happened so quickly on the Facebook page, Colin. As a result, I think of the daily bulletins, etc., that I was unable, I've got to admit, to keep such a close eye on the page as I would like to. So, Colin, you're now the moderator, so you'll be looking after the page on a day-to-day basis. And obviously, everybody is entitled to their opinion, get involved in debates, disagree, but let's not fall out over it. That's a big thing. But you'll be keeping a wee eye on that. And thanks everybody for getting involved on Facebook and also on the bulletin. One final point from Mark before we go. Take into account, Colin, they're still in the Europa League. Who did they play in the SPL after a Euro game? That could be taken into account, absolutely. By no means would I rather not be in Europe, but you've got to try and look for as many margins as possible, Colin. That might come into it, who knows. So, regardless of what happens, we'll be there every step of the way. I've got to thank Colin once again for coming in at the last minute, but you've extended it by an hour. So thanks very much for joining me, Colin, on A Celtic State of Mind.